Imagine Elon making, Pokemon Elon Musk edition, where you play as Elon Musk and you catch people whose job it is to praise Elon Musk. Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show that takes a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share the story of a video game-related controversy to my friends. Today, we're going back to the second part of our episode on Pokemon fan games, talking about the motivations behind the development of things like Pokemon ROM hacks and fan games, and the big question that is going to be the hinge of this controversy, which is, are these things legal? So without further ado, I'm going to take it back to the discussion between me, Phil Thomas, Andy Hunter, and Kate Lynch for the second part of our episode. Enjoy. So what we're going to do next is talk about the motivations behind this community. Why do people do this? And we're going to talk about that. Any other points before we move on?
I'm just kind of wondering, where's the scandal here?
I'm glad you asked. We're going to cover that. But we need to build up first to get to the scandal.
Well, the scandal is clearly that, if Pokemon is turning children into killers, think of how much more dangerous fan games could be, Phil.
That blew my mind.
All right, so we will get to the question of the scandal, but why do people devote so much time to this? And there's a lot of conversations actually about this in both ROM hacking and fan game communities. And so on the one hand, they end up being a pretty good entry point for people looking to cultivate or show off their programming or game design skills. In fact, there's a long history of game developers coming up into the industry through the modding and hacking scene. It's like if someone really wants to teach themselves how to make games, they really want to know how to make games, but they kind of don't know where to start. Where some people do is they'll turn to an existing game, like one that's commercially made, commercially built that they have access to, and they'll just kind of find ways that they could tweak it and modify it and alter it and kind of build their skills that way and interact with this really active community. So, for example, Cool Boy Man is the guy who made Pokemon Brown, and as we're going to learn next, I've also designed Pokemon Prism. He kind of got into it because he was an aspiring programmer and used designing his ROM hacks as a way of teaching himself assembly language and hex code. And despite the questionable legality, which we'll get into in a minute, it could be a good thing to put on a dev's resume that they are experienced with this or that programming style, and maybe even refer to some of their fan work as proof. And if you're more interested in this aspect of the ROM hacking community, I recommend people check out Alex Custodio's 2020 book, Who Are You? Nintendo's Game Boy Advance platform, because he covers a lot about Game Boy Advance ROM hacking, specifically Fire Emblem ROM hacking, and I'll include the link in the notes. Others use modding and ROM hacking and fan game design to show off their technical prowess, pushing an existing game beyond its previously understood limits. And some people love the challenge of making a Game Boy ROM do things that its developers wouldn't even have thought about, 30 years ago when they made it. And one of my favorite examples in this regard is the very directly named Dangerous Dave in copyright infringement. Is there any chance that anybody's heard of this? I feel like this might be in your wheelhouse, Kate.
No, I feel like I would remember that. No.
You may recognize the name behind Dangerous Dave and copyright infringement. Dangerous Dave and copyright infringement was an unauthorized adaptation of Super Mario Bros. 3, developed for the PC in 1990 by John Carmack, who designed it in his spare time. Yeah, John Carmack made it.
Wait, John, is he one of the creators of Doom? Oh, whoa.
Yeah, we're going to look at video of this, right?
Absolutely. Give me a second. So John Carmack designs Dangerous Dave and copyright infringement in 1990. He did it while he was working for a computer company called SoftDisk. So this is pre-id. It's kind of a stretch to call it a game. It's kind of a tech demo. It's a recreation of the first level of Super Mario Bros. 3 running on a PC to show that horizontal scrolling, like seamless horizontal scrolling from one part of the screen to another, was possible on a PC because it really hadn't been done at that point. So how Super Mario Bros. 3, when you move through it, it's a fluid transition. You don't see any loading. It's just one level. PC games at the time, you need to have one screen, and then when you went to the edge of the screen, loaded up the next screen, you move through that, load up the next part of the screen, and he wanted to show that you could do it seamlessly because that really hadn't been done before.
Okay, that blows my mind. That wasn't possible, or no one
figured
there was a market for it.
No one figured out how to do it in the 80s. And so he wanted to see if he could do it. Dangerous Dave, by the way, was a John Romero character. He loved alliteration, like Commander Keen, Dangerous Dave. He had a lot of games he made in the 80s that had alliterative names like this. And they sent this to Nintendo. and offered to make a PC port of Super Mario Bros. 3. John Carmack and John Romero and a couple of other buddies of theirs at Soft Disk. And Nintendo turned them down. They weren't interested in that. However, this was one of the things, not the only thing, but this was one of the things that inspired John Carmack, John Romero, and a bunch of their other programmer buddies to leave and form their own company id Software, developers of a certain hell-themed game that we will be covering in a future episode. So that's an example of like we're using an adaptation of an existing game to, push technical limits. Fan projects also build on one another, as the common practices in communities is to share knowledge with other developers to help improve the quality of ROM hacks and fan games as a whole. This is part of a mindset known as the hacker ethic, which got the name from a journalist named Stephen Levy in the 1980s from his 1984 book called Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution. And basically the idea is it emphasizes a free and open exchange of ideas. Everybody's building things for the benefit of the community. People are making new discoveries, and they're sharing them with everybody. This sort of free and open exchange of information is a big part of the hacker ethic. Guys like John Carmack was a big believer in the hacker ethic. And so you see this in the Pokemon game communities too. So like, for example, the fact that there are these really active message boards like Poke Community, and there are all of these support systems like Pokemon Essentials, and like the dumb source code for like Fire Red and Emerald and GitHub. And like it's the whole idea is like an active community. We're all kind of learning together and we're all making our games better that way is built into this community. And it has a long history in the history of computers. And there's another reason why people do this. It's not just all technical stuff. People do it because they're just big Pokemon fans. And a lot of times people, when they talk about designing a fan game or designing a ROM hack, they often talk about it as being a tribute or a love letter to the series. So for example, as Evan Starr, creator of the fan game Pokemon Ethereal Gates, explained to Stephen Messner, a PC gamer, for a 2016 article, he said, quote, "We really like this as a love letter to the fans of Pokemon, saying, this was the feeling we first got playing Pokemon and we want to give that back to you," end quote. And Gavin Marshall, project lead in another fan game called Pokemon Phoenix Rising, added for the same article, quote, "We're creating an intricate piece of fan art," end quote. But yeah, people wouldn't invest the amount of time making Pokemon purple or whatever if they didn't feel some kind of satisfaction doing it. These folks love Pokemon, and part of their love language is to create new experiences using Pokemon games as their medium.
Yeah, it's the game creation version of, like you said, fan art or fan fiction. It's adding your own little spoonful of sand onto the collective Pokemon sandcastle.
Oh, did you want to jump in, Kate?
No, I was looking at fan art. You said fan art, and I was trying to make.
What did you uncover?
No, this one's fine. It's not scary, but I was trying to talk about this is the good kind of fan art and not the gross kind. But I couldn't put together a joke.
Well, I don't know. Maybe this is still a gross kind of fan art. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. It is horrifying. Who is this now? Oh, I don't know who that is. I'm not even going to share my screen on that one.
All right. Another part that's worth mentioning is that in some fan project circles, these are people who are hungry for new content, who don't receive new content from the game's creators for long stretches of time, and try to fill in that gap in any way they can. Take, for example, going back to Streets of Rage Remake, that 2011 Streets of Rage fan game I mentioned a few minutes ago. At the time, the most recent mainline game in the Streets of Rage series was Streets of Rage 3, which came out for the Sega Genesis in 1994. And we would not see an official new game in the series until the admittedly dope as hell Streets of Rage 4, which came out in 2020. For some of these franchises, not necessarily Pokemon, which has games that come out pretty regularly, there's not a lot of content, and it looks like the makers are in no hurry to put out like F-Zero is a great example. If we're talking about Nintendo, there hasn't been a new F-Zero game since 2003. Nintendo seems like they're in no hurry to make a new F-Zero game. Nintendo seems like they're in no hurry to make a Star Fox game, especially a Star Fox game that goes into the style that people like say a Star Fox 64. No, we get Star Fox Adventures or whatever they were trying to do with Star Fox Zero. For some people, they just want more of this stuff and they're just not getting it from the official win, so they start making it themselves. And so looking at that way, they're not trying to steal sales away. They're not trying to make a competing product. If anything, they want to share their love of these properties so that the original IP holders like Nintendo, like Sega, will just give them a little bit more love and maybe put out a new game. I mean, I bought Streets of Rage 4 when it came out. It's awesome. It's a really good game. But it took a long time to get a new Streets of Rage game. Now, here's goes back to your question, Phil. So with all this talk about Fakemon and Pac-Man knockoffs, you may ask yourself, where's the controversy here? aside from, Helga Zepp LaRouche and whatever the hell she's talking about. And to answer that, we need to finally examine a very important question that I imagine a lot of you are having, maybe our listeners are having too. Is all of this legal? And before I go any further, I need to preface what's to come by saying one thing: I'm not a legal historian, nor am I a legal expert of any kind. All of this is coming from a layperson's perspective. And I'm sure there will definitely be places where I fall short. So that being said, if we have legal experts who'd like to offer corrections or a more insider's perspective, scandalsgamespodcast@gmail.com. Also, on a related note to that, if you're thinking of developing your own Pokemon fan project, please do not take anything we say here as legal advice as to whether you should bring your erotic adventures of Gardevoir to life.
Bill, that's a Pokemon that vaguely resembles a lady. And so if you're a thirsty person on the internet wanting to sexualize a Pokemon, Gardevoir is a little bit less of a lift than, Squirtle. But...
Yeah, public service announcement. If you're looking online to try to find a picture of Gardevoir, put your safe search on.
Or don't. It depends on what your goal is.
So whether these Pokemon projects or other similar fan projects for other game franchises are legal, unless the makers get explicit permission from the copyright holders, then strictly speaking, the answer is no. The series branding, design, and assets, the characters, the items, the regions, and the Pokemon themselves are properties of Nintendo, who own the copyright and the registered trademarks for the series and its associated media. And if you make a ROM hack or a fan game without Nintendo's express permission, then you're infringing on their intellectual property and are potentially open to Nintendo seeking legal action against you. And this is without even getting into the legal discussion over emulation, which we talked about this a little bit in our ROM hack episode. Because you recall, ROM hacks require access to a digital copy of a retail Pokemon game. And so that's even without talking about that part of it. And the legality of that has been under debate. And on top of that, copyright holders do need to occasionally defend their works from infringement, lest they risk losing control over them. So for example, as the writer of a 2016 article for Inverse explained on the legality of fan projects, quote, "As fun as it is to demonize the big companies for laying down the law with fan games, any intellectual property lawyer will tell you that it's a necessary caution to protect a brand as huge as Pokemon, regardless of whether it's not for profit," end quote. And the article cited an IP media strategist named Alex Tuddy, who told a reporter for Wired in 2011, quote, "If a company was to continually ignore infringements of a trademark, the protection afforded by the mark is eroded and may render it invalid. Once the infringement of IP is ignored, it becomes increasingly hard to recover lost ground," end quote. And so in that respect, a copyright holder like Nintendo may risk the death of its IP from 1,000 cuts if enough projects go unchecked. Now, some in the fan community do try to make legal justifications supporting their work. A common argument, for example, people offer is that fan games and ROM hacks are fair use. Do y'all know fair use? All our legal experts?
Well, yes. As a legal expert who accepts payment in Scandal Coin, my understanding of fair use is that you are using copyrighted material, but you're altering it in some way, whether like to provide commentary or satire or for education purposes. And I think a fair use argument is somewhat stronger when you're not making a profit off of it, but I don't know that for sure. But yeah, the idea is, well, yeah, I'm just using this as an example to educate or basically to prove my own argument, as opposed to just, look, here's Pokemon, buy it from me instead of Nintendo. That's kind of what the argument of fair use is, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's sort of typically it's if it's unedited or like verbatim clips or images or something like that for stuff like as you said, Andy, news reporting or like research or like commentary or like film critique, that sort of thing. And if you're not making a profit, it's a stronger deal. But and sometimes that's why I like say if there's a YouTube, I think there's like if there are YouTube channels that provide clips of say a movie that they're reviewing and it is under fair use, but that video is blowing up, they're more likely to get put under the spotlight for a copyright claim because they're making money from the ads or it just gets demonetized.
So I think both of you made really good definitions of fair use. It's provisions in copyright law, and it goes by different names in different countries. For example, in the UK, they call it fair dealing. Same thing. It allows people to use copyrighted material, so like recreating video footage, using images without the copyright holder's permission under specific provisions, like, critical examination for educational purposes, archival purposes is another example, provided that the usage is for nonprofit and doesn't affect the market value of the copyrighted work. So it's not a competing product. To that end, it's generally understood among the ROM hacking and fan game communities that their works are strictly nonprofit enterprises. That means no charging for a given project and making it clear in both the game itself and the associated online materials, such as websites and social media accounts, that it's an unofficial Pokemon adaptation, should not be construed as an official Nintendo product. And there's some people in the community who take it even further than that and say, they warn aspiring fan project developers that any kind of money, indirectly or directly derived from their work, can put them at risk of legal action. So this includes everything from taking Patreon donations, advertising revenue on their websites, or ad revenue on a YouTube channel. That those things are, don't do those things. You're going to put yourself at greater risk, arguing this is fair use. And the general argument is that what they're doing is fair use. Whether it actually is fair use is a whole nother question.
I think part of it is who gets in trouble and why versus who doesn't get in trouble. It's sort of is it worth it? For instance, we were talking about fan art. I mean, fan art is probably under the same umbrella that you're talking about, Kevin, but it's what does someone have to gain by going after a fan artist who's just putting their stuff up online for free? Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, this kind of thing goes on a lot in a lot of communities, not just Pokemon, where it's it's not really worth it for Nintendo to go through the legal effort to challenge them. It seems like it's a little different when it comes to specific game projects, because then they might make the argument that they actually are making a competing project. So a person who's making fan art is not exactly making a mainline Pokemon game or anything. That might be where they make the distinctions. Again, it's not a cut and dried thing, but the general argument they try to make is that this is this fair use thing. Another part of that argument is that while ROM hacks are built on the proprietary code of a given game, that the additional coding put in the hack is original work. That is something that the developer is making on their own. It's their code that they built on top of this existing game. And therefore, some people try to argue that that is their property. The code itself that's added on to this, that's hacking this ROM, is their code and not Nintendo's. And that the same goes for things like fan-created assets like Fakemon, which leads some people to argue that fan projects should be considered what is known as transformative works. This is an exception in copyright, where if an individual group adapted or iterated upon a copyrighted work, in this case, say a retail Pokemon game, to such an extent that the modified or hacked version becomes so distinct that it can be considered an original work in itself. That it's built on this thing, but it's distinguished enough from the other thing that it's considered a new thing. It's a new piece of intellectual property. Then that would be the property of whoever made that part of non-Nintendo. That's kind of the argument people try to make with this. And again, not a lawyer. I'm not going to say it's a successful argument. And on top of that, there are people who try to say that what they're doing is parody. As one Poke community poster declared in a 2017 thread on the legality of ROM hacks, they said, quote, "If you're editing it, then that means you've created a parody, and that means you are creating an alteration of the content in an attempt to joke on or simulate the experience. For example, you cannot be arrested or be put into jail for creating a parody song like the ones Weird Al makes. In my opinion, this rule would also apply to a parody of a game," end quote.
That sounds like somebody who, one, doesn't exactly correctly understand the definition of parody, and also doesn't understand that Weird Al, in order to commercially release his songs, I believe does need to, come to some sort of legal agreement with the rights holders of those songs, because even though he's changing the lyrics, if he's using the same music that the original song is written to, then that part is, he's transforming the lyrics, but if he's not transforming the music, then, he needs to make his own, come to that agreement, which is different from, I know Weird Al has created songs that are simply in the style of a certain other artist. And that is more, I think, in this realm of, it's the parody or this work is in conversation with that other work. Very different from, I took what you did and I changed some percentage of it to make it a new thing.
It also just sounds like he wants to see Weird Al behind bars, like the way he phrased it.
Yeah, jumping off that, Weird Al's a great example. I know Weird Al got in some trouble a number of years ago in 2006 when he put out a parody of the song "You're Beautiful" called "You're Pitiful," where there was a legal discussion over that, whether he got the permission, whether he was allowed to. He's in an active conversation with the people who are creating, because he is adapting on something that they've already built on. And also, I don't know, again, not a legal expert, I don't know how strong a parody argument could be for a Pokemon fan game or a ROM hack, because parody is part of copyright law. So parody is defined, according to the Cornell Law School, they define parody as, quote, taking a piece of creative work, such as an art, literature, or film, and imitating it in an exaggerated comedic fashion, Parody often serves as a criticism or commentary on the original work, the artist who created it, and something otherwise connected to the work, end quote. But I don't know if that counts for Pokemon ROM hacks and fan games, because they're not trying to comedically send up or satirize the Pokemon experience. They're trying to recreate the Pokemon experience. Like, they're trying to make it like a variation of a mainline Pokemon game. I will say, though, there's one exception that I can think of off the top of my head. There's a game called Pokemon Black and Blue, which was a free Flash game developed by the animal rights activist group PETA, where your job was to free Pokemon and have them beat up the people who had captured them. That would probably be considered a parody. And as a side thing, PETA games will probably be an episode.
Oh,
There's a series of these games and they're fucking nuts.
but the idea of like comparing parody to like a ROM hack or a fan game that uses the official asset, to me is like saying, for example, Mel Brooks's movie Dracula Dead and Loving It is a parody of various Dracula movies, probably most specifically Bram Stoker's Dracula. But I would say a ROM hack is more like if you took the actual footage from Bram Stoker's Dracula and you replaced everybody's face with a recording of your own face saying, whatever you're saying, but otherwise the footage is the same, because then it's like, Mel Brooks created all new footage and all new script and everything. He's not using the literal code foundation in the same way that a ROM hack or a fan game that uses official assets are, which to me probably makes the legal argument of, oh, look, it's a parody work a little more touch and go.
And for the record, Andy being an actor, a version of that movie with him as every single character is the version not only he wants to see, but I definitely want to see.
And the version that the world deserves to see.
Deserves. Yeah. Agreed.
My English accent is at least 1% better than Keanu Reeves's.
It would kind of have to be. I've never heard of it.
So another part of this argument is, and even as you pointed out, Kate, like even when people do things in fair use, where you could make a argument that it isn't fair use, like say a critical essay on YouTube, people get copyright struck all the time anyway. And so like, even when people are in a more solid position to make the fair use argument, that doesn't guarantee that they're not going to have some kind of response from the people who own the original copyright. Like even people who are doing what you could argue is fair use still have to navigate and sometimes do have to challenge. Like it happens all the time on YouTube where people, they get demonetized and they get copyright struck and things like that, where they do need to make a kind of argument that says, this is actually fair use, and appeal to say YouTube and say that it's fair use. So even saying fair use, that doesn't mean you're not going to get some kind of heat from the copyright holders.
I think it also, I think it depends on what you're fair using, for lack of a better term. Like, are the rights holders known to be particularly litigious, or do they, are they really looking for stuff of this nature so that they can take it down? I mean, I know, Kev, you've mentioned a number of attempted fan recreations of games that it's like, we're never going to get, what's the Earthbound game? Not Mother 3. Is it Mother 3? The one that people that they've been trying desperately for years to recreate, because it's not like, I would buy it if you would give it to me, but you're not giving it to me, so I'm going to make it myself. And haven't they pulled the rug out from under people a number of times?
Yeah, and so that's a great example where, people wanted Mother 3. Mother 3 was a whole big harried thing to get made in the first place. And it released in Japan. And there was a small dedicated fan base of Mother fans who were in the West who wanted to be able to play it, who constantly pester Nintendo about this. Reggie Fils-Aimé likes the joke, the former head of Nintendo of America, likes the joke about the amount of people who come up to him and say, when is Mother 3 coming out in the West? There are tons of jokes about this. And the thing is that eventually a group of people got together and says, you know what, we're going to start making a fan translation and a localization. We'll let Nintendo know what we're doing. And we make it clear throughout every step of this process that the second Nintendo announces that they're localizing Mother 3 for the West, we will stop. We're doing this until they do this. And then Nintendo just never did it. And they put it out for people to see it. And Nintendo hasn't made any actions. They're definitely aware of them. But it seems like they've really just kind of looked the other way on it. Which is a bummer. Mother 3 is really good. If it was on Switch Online or something, I would definitely play it. But in the meantime, people hold themselves over with this. And it's again, kind of that balance too, is in some respects, the copyright holders are aware that these things are out there and just kind of look the other way. Because again, I think you pointed this out, Kate, sometimes it's just not really worth the legal effort to do it. And sometimes companies will weigh the PR of that and like, do we want to push on this, or do we want to let people say this is like a love letter to the fans and all this stuff, and we'll kind of let them do it and not sue them? That's how we're showing our love for our fans, is we're not going to send our lawyers against them.
Can I just inject another angle there that may or may not apply here? And the parallel I see is with like the NBA and the NFL and video clips of plays on, say, Twitter. So the NFL, unlike the NBA, for a while had different stances on whether or not they were going to crush you if you uploaded video of one of those two things. I think the NFL stance was, get it off the internet. And the NBA took a different stance because I think they realized that those video clips were going a long way towards increasing engagement with, the NBA. So the more you watch those clips on Twitter, the more likely you are to, buy League Pass or cable or something, or buy a ticket to an NBA game. So when I think about what's happening here with, say, fair use, I mean, something we all know is that those laws were written before any of these use cases were ever invented. So it's probably just true that, these laws were not written with games in mind. And we will have to figure out, one, what's the spirit of these laws in terms of what these products are, but like, what's the impact that we want? Like, if these fan games are increasing engagement with this brand and this product, then as the company who created that or owns the rights to it, you would not be incentivized to get rid of these games, because it's only selling more of your product in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. And it's like the video game industry has basically built a lot of their model these days on the fact that their fans will do a lot of the work for them. That they love what they have. They will share, they'll share clips from games, they'll do let's plays and stuff like that. And like they will put out all of this good, and sometimes just by like stepping back, they build up so much goodwill, and then people want to put more of that stuff out there, and it expands their brand. So it's kind of like there's a benefit for a copyright holder to sometimes just like look the other way on it. And I mean, the other argument you can make is like, so one of the other big arguments that happens in copyright laws, again, not an expert, is that there's an argument about something called market harm. And so the question is like, does the existence of a fan-created Pokemon game create unfair competition for the mainline game? And you could probably genuinely make the argument that no, there's no way they're going to compete with Nintendo. Even if you have tons of people sharing it online, you're never going to have the reach of Pokemon. Nintendo does have with Pokemon. So you're never going to realistically unseat Nintendo in terms of like, people will still buy the mainline Pokemon. And on top of it, like the reason people consume these things is because they love Pokemon. It's like, not only will they play the ROM hack, they will also buy the mainline Pokemon game. So like they're going to play like Pokemon Uranium, and they're also going to buy Pokemon Scarlet. Like there's kind of a built-in market base there anyway. So you could also make the argument that they're not competing. If anything, they're enhancing the brand. Again, that's an argument that could be made. You could also make the argument that they are infringing on the copyright and they are diluting the brand and can create confusion and all that stuff. You could definitely make that argument. Nintendo has made that argument. But yeah, you could also see the flip side of that too. And also there's another part of that too, is like the argument Nintendo will make, and we'll see this in our next episode, is like, why would you bother buying something when you can get it for free? So like, here's another Nintendo example. If someone made a fan game of, say, Legend of Zelda versus Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which is going to be $70 now. That being said, I think that people who would also make a fan game of Legend of Zelda are going to pay the $70 and buy Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. So you could push either way. I don't think Nintendo's realistically losing any sales from any of this stuff, and that there is a certain benefit to just kind of letting it happen because it creates a kind of goodwill that you mentioned, Phil, with like the NBA.
Sorry, before you move on, in that case, I do have a question about this.
Sure.
To your knowledge, are there fan games that like are not being pursued by the copyright holders because, for lack of a better term, it's like the copyright holders are like, this game isn't very good, and they're basically baiting us to hopefully go after them, and then it creates scandal, and so more people will seek the game out. You know what I mean? Like,
it's possible.
Oh, it's a game Nintendo doesn't want you to play, but it's like, if Nintendo does nothing, then people will play it, realize it stinks, and it'll, a year from now we'll have moved on.
That's the other part of that too, is like, I wonder if sometimes they see that, because what will inevitably happen, and this is what we'll talk about next time when we actually dive into specific games, is then people make the argument, yeah, this is the game Nintendo doesn't want you to play. And you risk that Streisand effect where it's like you have put too much attention on a small, what can be an average, mediocre game, Postal, and you're building a whole bunch of free advertising and free publicity for them that will then make it a big deal. When it wasn't a big deal, we just let it die down. I think I know the example you're talking about, Kate, Escape from Tomorrow. Did you want to mention Escape from Tomorrow?
Yeah, so it's not the same thing as a fan game, but it's basically it's this independent movie that was shot years ago, clandestine in Disney World or Disneyland, one of those, and it was done all on the sly because legally you at least at the time you were not allowed to film in Disney. I think that's still true. I mean, famously, the Florida Project, the footage of Disney, oops, sorry, spoiler for that movie, that was filmed on the director's cell phone because you're not allowed to do this anyway. This guy with Escape from Tomorrow made this independent movie. It's shot in black and white, or it was released in black and white, and it's sort of like what I can only describe as like David Lynch for idiots. Like, it's not a good movie at all. It's trying to be weird and abstract and sci-fi, and it's just bad. But I remember when it first came out, the cover is Mickey's gloved hand reaching up with like blood dripping off of it, and it says like Escape from Tomorrow in the Disney font. And you're not used to seeing this sort of thing. And I remember when it came out that people were like, what's Disney going to do? What's Disney going to do? Oh my gosh, they shot a movie in Disney and you're not allowed to do that. It was like guerrilla filmmaking. And Disney, as far as I can tell, at least at the time, really did nothing. I mean, maybe they made some sort of quiet statement, but they did not, as far as I know, they didn't make a fuss and try to get it pulled. They did not try to sue the director. I can't even recall there being any sort of a public statement that this movie was bad. And I sought out a copy, through entirely legal means online, and Kevin and I watched it, and it was just like, it was really just a nothing bad movie. And it was sort of like, probably they don't have to, they're Disney, their pockets are deep enough, like they could squash this person like a bug if they wanted to, but I think they probably know the smartest thing to do is nothing, because anyone who's going to watch this movie, they're not about to go recommend it to their friends afterwards. They're going to be like, I feel stupider for having watched that. And if they do anything, then it becomes the thing, like the movie that Disney doesn't want you to see, you know?
Jumping off that, because Kate and I did watch it together. It's terrible. So going back to our discussion, like kind of taking a fairly positive stance on this in the gaming community, May. But that isn't to say that fan games and ROM hacks are universally accepted or supported among gamers. Some in the community view them as infringing on Nintendo's IP rights. And well-intentioned or not, developers of these kinds of games are watering down or taking away from the Pokemon brand. So for example, in a comment thread from a July the 6th, 2019 Nintendo Life article I found on Pokemon ROM hacks, one poster commented, quote, I'm not sure I'd call them dedicated and committed Pokemon fans if they're using the IP for something illegal, end quote. A few people added that they thought the devs should put all that effort and talent toward original indie projects not connected to the Pokemon brand, with one noting, quote, I know they love Pokemon and they're dedicated, but good thoughts and determination doesn't make things legal. You could just make a game with a different name and try to become something legal like many indie developers have done with all the retro throwback games. They can make something new and great and legal, end quote. And meanwhile, the RPG Maker community is strongly divided on the subject of using the engine for games based on existing brands. And ripping, as it's known in the RPG Maker community, is frowned upon among some RPG Maker users, as they feels it opens up the entire engine accusations that it's only being used for copyright infringement.
What is ripping?
So ripping is, I'm sorry, I didn't really define that very well. So in the RPG Maker community, a person who uses RPG Maker to just make a fan adaptation of an existing game, like Pokemon, like Final Fantasy, like Chrono Trigger, they call that ripping. You're ripping a game, like ripping it off. So that's really divided in the community. And there's some people that say that RPG Maker should only be used for original games. And there's actually a whole subgenre of people who've made stuff in RPG Maker. I believe like Undertale was made in RPG Maker, for example.
Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with a brief correction here. Undertale was actually not developed in RPG Maker. Undertale's developer Toby Fox did work on a couple projects in RPG Maker 2000 and actually did some Earthbound ROM hacking. However, Undertale was developed through Game Maker Studio, not RPG Maker. Examples of notable indie games developed through RPG Maker include Grimm's Hollow, To the Moon, Off, and Omori, among many others. Apologies for the error, and back to the show.
And so some people say you shouldn't be using this in the first place, and that it makes it more likely that a company like Nintendo is going to come in and say, RPG Maker is just being used to make rip-off games, as opposed to being an avenue for making original games. So, for example, Pokemon fan games came up in a discussion thread started on the RPG Maker web forums on September the 2nd, 2018. And several people chimed in they felt the people behind these kinds of games should not be making them in the first place. As one poster observed, quote, You know how you share your love of Pokemon? You make your own IP. Don't copy others, just make your own. That's how you share your love of game creation, end quote. Another simply added regarding Pokemon Uranium, a Pokemon fan game we'll cover in our next episode, quote, why spend 8 years making something that isn't yours, end quote. And to be fair, despite attempts at legal justifications, the overwhelming majority of people in the Pokemon fan project community are aware that they're operating in a territory that's not strictly legal under intellectual property laws. And the threat of legal action is the sword of Damocles that hangs over every ROM hack and fan game. For example, from that PC Gamer article I mentioned a few minutes ago, Pokemon Phoenix Rising maker Gavin Marshall added, quote, we're not out to create something that rivals Nintendo in any way. Whoever owns the rights to what you're creating always has the right to say, nope, this should not be in the public eye. We're always aware of that risk at all times, but we're not creating a fan game and thinking that it could fail. We're creating a fan game and thinking it could succeed and people can enjoy it, end quote. However, despite all this, the risk of most projects attracting legal attention is generally pretty low. Again, this is not an endorsement, but just something that we can learn from the history of these types of games. So most of the time, it's not really worth the legal effort to come after. In some cases, as Kate pointed out, you could have the reverse effect where all of a sudden you broadcast this thing and make it a big deal when it's probably just, some shitty high schooler making that's not a nice thing. There's some shitty games some high schooler made.
Shitty high schoolers, yes. No, you were right the first time.
And there's an unwritten rule in the ROM hacking and fan game communities that it's okay to promote your game and it's okay to attract a following so long as you're not pretending your project's an official Pokemon game and you're not bringing in money by doing so. However, if your project gets too much attention, then chances are you might also attract the attention of Nintendo's legal team. And we'll cover 2 examples of Pokemon fan projects that created just that kind of attention next time. So with that, final thoughts.
I feel, my only point that I haven't said already, and I'm sure we will have many occasions to talk about this in the next episode, is that it probably won't be tested for real in the courts until somebody makes a fan game or ROM hack and also has a legal budget comparable to that of the mega corporation that holds the copyright. Because otherwise, if Nintendo knocks on my door and says, take down what you're doing, I'm like, well, they have more lawyers than I do. I can't. In a battle of attrition, they're going to win. So just got to say, okay. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying about people saying, like, why would you even do this? Why would you work on something that's not yours? The argument of, hey, do you know how you show your appreciation for something that someone else created? You go off and you create something else that is in the same, genre, but it's different. That doesn't make sense to me. I guess it could be like, if you like this movie, maybe you like filmmaking, that's one thing, but it's sort of like, if you like this movie, go make your own movie, but it better not be anything like the movie you like. That's just kind of a nonsense argument to me. And it's like, I'm just going to take my ball and go home. It's like, well, I don't get this just seems out of touch, similar to what we started with. It was like, why would you make something if it's not yours? Why would you work on something that's not yours? And I think that anything fan made, whether it's fan art, fan games, fan fiction, fan films, people don't do it to make money. People don't do it because they want to steal someone else's ideas. They do it because they love these ideas. And often it's filling a void that they have from that property. Either it's like, this series, they're never going to make a new game, but I desperately want the story to continue. Or I really love these characters and I hate how their story ended and I want to make them a better ending. Something like that. I read something recently, and I don't know how true this is because I haven't dug into it, but apparently it's been shown that when you really like a character, whether it's in a book or a game or a movie or what have you, and that property ends, you play the game to the end, or you finish the book, or if that character dies in the story, your brain processes it similar to when you lose a real person in real life. Like either they die, or when you finish the game, it's like, I don't get to see that friend anymore. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that this just comes out of passion and love for the property. And I think that there's a really, to your point, Kevin, there's a really devoted fan base for Pokemon. So it makes sense that a lot of the examples that you're able to pull for this are from that particular set of games.
Kevin, I feel like we're probably going to get even more into this conversation in the next episode, like the nuances of, motivations versus impact. So I guess I'll leave that for the last episode. But going back to the initial topic that you started today's episode with, like the ROM hacking community, something that occurred to me was that, can you draw a line between the birth of ROM hacking and, say, Minecraft? Like the need of a certain portion of a fan base to not just interact with something that's already been created by somebody else, but the need to create their own experienceable content within the framework of this world.
I think that's a great point. And I think that Minecraft is a great example of that because, yeah, people can experience that through just the actual mechanics of, exploration or the story modes they add there or building something. And like to the point that it creates a sandbox that people can actually do some really amazing things. There's people who like program games in Minecraft and use the mechanics of the game to make a game within it. And like Super Mario Maker is a great example of that too. It's basically an official Nintendo toolkit that has been put out where people can build their own Mario-inspired games with all the assets that Nintendo will allow, and they can build experiences in there. And I know that the ones I've seen of Super Mario Maker are usually making just really fucking hard Mario. But yeah, I think that you definitely see that there is definitely, they're not necessarily every gamer who wants to do this, but there's some people who want the engagement in that way. Like they want to be able to develop their own experiences. They want to have their own level of creativity. I think of like when I was a kid, the way I interacted with my media is like, I want to make my own stories in my head related to this. I want to, make a superhero who fights next to Superman. I want to, go through Hyrule and make my own adventure and kind of that stuff. And you can see the compulsion to do that. Some people think about that. Some people make it. And like, people want to learn how to program. People just want a different Pokemon experience and want to see if they can make that. Like, it's a fairly encouraging community. I know one of the articles I read is like, if you want to start ROM hacking, maybe try text ROM hacking just to get your sea legs. See if you want to do like, don't dive into a huge, big project. But like, there's definitely an environment and there's definitely not necessarily a huge market for it, but there is a market for people to make games like that and like to make games in the style of these things they found because they like them. And Andy, I can't help but think of your allusion to the fact that we're never going to see a legal challenge to this until someone has enough resources that could actually stand up to Nintendo. And I think I finally found a more productive use of Elon Musk's time. So Elon, because I know you're definitely listening.
Don't talk to him.
Imagine Elon making, Pokemon Elon Musk edition, where you play as Elon Musk and you catch people whose job it is to praise Elon Musk. And you battle people who don't praise Elon Musk by, sticking Nazis on them or calling them pedophiles. And maybe we make it all based on Pokemon Fire Red because that's very active in the community. And we see what maybe Nintendo's aware of this and we just see them hash it out a little bit and see what happens.
I don't listen, Kevin. To me, that sounds sick. And not because of any of the content of the game, but because it would involve pressing buttons. And down with pressing buttons to play games. My final word on the matter.
At least Pavlovian dogs get food.
Wow. We made a lot of enemies in this episode. Can I go back to one more observation?
Sure.
So, Andy, you were talking about until somebody has the money to sue somebody like that in court. For a product perspective, you may not want to. Like take that officially sanctioned Mario Maker. Where did they get the information that something like that would sell? They didn't get it from any of the products that, they wrote and put out on the market. They got it from the community. Like if I was playing Monster Hunter World and I hacked in wire bugs, and then a bunch of people were like, oh, this game's great. It has wire bugs in it. If I'm one of the people at Capcom, it's like, oh, well, I'm supposed to come up with a new feature for the next Monster Hunter. There it is. Thanks. Woo, it's like press send. Great job, Phil Thomas.
And aren't there a lot of examples of that too? Like fan games that there were aspects that were so well received that end up being either shouted out or included in later like sequels to those games?
Yeah, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail next episode. But sometimes the developers, they look at this and they either say, not just that we're going to look the other way, we're going to embrace this. We're going to make this mainline. Like a great example of this, Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike was a mod of Half-Life, which a bunch of fans put together. It was kind of like a squad-based military shooter that they adapted from Half-Life. And Valve looked at that and they basically made that a mainline product. They brought in the guys who made this mod and basically made it a mainline thing for Valve. And like, there are lots of examples of like Dota. Dota started out as a mod of old school Warcraft. And like, people see as a large interest, as a big response that people love this thing. It's like, let's give them more of that thing. Let's give them that thing. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of like a form of like viral market research. Where the fans are already kind of making this feature, they're play testing this feature, and some says, if we embrace this thing and we charge money, that'd be something people want. And like people still play Counter-Strike now, like that's a big deal. People play Dota now. But yeah, there's definitely places where they'll even just outright embrace them. They become part of the world of this game.
I think Christian Whitehead, who was I think the head designer of Sonic Mania. I think he got on Sega's radar by making like fan Sonic levels or games or something to that effect. So yeah, some game studios will take this and foster it, and others will stamp it out like a cigarette carelessly thrown out on the sidewalk.
Yeah, there's a nuanced approach. There's no one size fits all when it comes to the way companies responding. Yeah, sometimes they'll outright embrace it, and sometimes they will do everything they can to shut these down, which we'll learn about in our next episode. So that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Sequi by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you got a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Phil Thomas.
I'm Andy Hunter.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.